The article I'm reviewing today is called The Impact of Taxes and Social Spending on Inequality and Poverty in Argentina, Bolivia, Brazil, Mexico, Peru, and Uruguay. Introduction to the special issue. So from the get-go, the authors make it very clear what their research question is, and that is, how much redistribution and poverty reduction is being accomplished in Latin America through social spending, subsidies, and taxes. The authors go about answering this question by looking at previously completed research. 6 research articles were completed in 2014, which provide the author with information or estimations on the impact of direct taxes, indirect taxes, subsidies, and social spending on inequality and poverty in the 6 mentioned countries before. What the authors have done is they've extracted this information and then they've placed it into a table and then have used that to compare and see how much reduction in poverty is actually being achieved in Latin American countries. One thing I will mention is that a second part of the article is this use of surveys. That the authors have found a collection of surveys that have been conducted in Latin American countries, which look at the impact of inequality and the incidence of poverty and the effect of taxes and social spending on it in different countries. But as the authors don't talk about this at all, I won't spend any time concluding it either. But a couple of the main findings that the authors found from the research is that the personal income tax within Latin American countries sits at about 2.1%. And when you compare that to the OECD average of 9%, there's quite a large discrepancy. The authors also found that the total in-kind transfers, these are not cash transfers, on social spending was actually comparable to OECD countries, and it sat at about 62 to 81%. So therefore you can sort of conclude that the authors are trying to suggest that the big difference between inequality in Latin America and maybe not so much in OECD countries is the difference between having a low personal income tax but having a similar social spending. So the authors also suggested that the 6 countries can be divided based on their success in redistributing and reducing poverty. So the first group of countries is Argentina, Brazil, and Uruguay. They were effective in reducing inequality by 20 to 25%. However, Peru, Bolivia, and Mexico were only effective in reducing it by 7.6 to 16%. Again, the authors don't extrapolate on this data, nor do they try and draw any trends from it, but it would be interesting to see if there was a comparison with some OECD countries. One of the important things to note here, and the authors mention it, is that Bolivia spends more than Uruguay as a percentage of its GDP, but it achieves less redistribution of poverty as the programs are not targeted to the poor. Another finding the authors make is that Bolivia doesn't pay personal income tax, and this also has an effect on poverty. Peru is effective in reducing poverty in certain areas, but its overall redistributive effect is minimal as it spends very little on GDP. Some of the other main conclusions the authors make is that direct taxes overall in Latin America are progressive, but they suggest because they are so small as a percentage of GDP, they have very little effect in reducing poverty. Overall, Latin American countries exhibit progressive cash transfer programs to the poor, except Bolivia. In Bolivia and Brazil, there was a zero net effect of cash transfers aimed to help alleviate poverty, as indirect taxes aimed at them cancelled the positive effect. If the authors included the in-kind transfers of education and health benefits, so of the social spending, as a measure of reducing inequality, they are much more effective in reducing and redistributing poverty and inequality than the benefits received from cash transfers. One of the things the authors didn't extract from the data but was present there was the Gini coefficient. And I found this interesting, that across all six countries, the average was 0.51, with only a range of 0.49 to 0.58. And as we know from our reading, a Gini coefficient closer to 1 is a greater sign of inequality. And again, it would be interesting to see if there is the Gini coefficient for maybe the top 20 OECD countries. Thank you.